12 Greatest Movie Villains. The Joker. Most recently played by Jared Leto in Suicide Squad, the Joker has become a notorious villain ever since he first appeared in the Batman comic books first released in 1940. Since then, he's been played memorably by Jack Nicholson in Tim Burton's Batman and by Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight. The latter's performance was critically acclaimed, and the actor won many accolades for his portrayal, including the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. Mark Hamill has voiced the Joker in several animated Batman and Justice League series, and the Arkham games since 1992's Batman the Animated Series. Voldemort. Characters in Harry Potter were so terrified of this villain that they couldn't even utter his name. Like Sauron, Voldemort is often too weak to take human form throughout the series of books that would eventually become films. Instead, he's been seen just in flashbacks or on the back of Professor Quirrell's head until the end of the 4th installment, where he finally takes physical shape. In the movies, this serpent-like form is played by Ralph Fiennes, who has also played serial killer Francis Dolarhyde in Red Dragons. The books, written by British novelist J.K. Rowling, were incredibly successful around the world and made the once poor author the best-selling living author in the UK. Hannibal Lecter. Anthony Hopkins won an Oscar for his incredible portrayal of Hannibal Lecter in the 1991's Silence of the Lambs, despite being only on screen for a combined total of 16 minutes. The film, which is based on the book by Thomas Harris, also got a nod for Best Picture. Jodie Foster, who played opposite Hopkins as Clance Starling, recently revealed that the tension between the pair was more than acting. The two never spoke to each other while filming the movie because Foster was so scared of Hopkins. Hopkins would reprise his role twice in Hannibal and Red Dragon. Lecter has also been the antagonist of 2 other films, Hannibal Rising and Manhunter, a version of Red Dragon in which Brian Cox became the first person to play Lecter. Darth Vader. The iconic black mask and menacing voice of James Earl Jones elevated Darth Vader to a pop culture legend and one of the most memorable characters, good or evil, to ever appear in a film. Vader first appeared in the 1977 original Star Wars, adorned in his classic all-black attire. Audiences get to see how innocent boy Anakin Skywalker transforms into the Lord of the Dark Side in episodes 1 to 3 of the series. Fans are hopeful that Vader will somehow make an appearance in the current series, though it is set years after Vader dies. Norman Bates. Psycho came out in 1960 and shocked audiences all around the country. People were yelling out loud in the theaters of sheer fright thanks to the master of suspense, Alfred Hitchcock, and Janet Leigh's iconic shower scene. The scene perhaps makes the movie's antagonist, Norman Bates, a slightly underrated character in the annals of movie villains. Anthony Perkins brilliantly plays Bates, the fictional serial killer who is loosely based on real-life killer Ed Gein. Perkins significantly increases the film's suspense with his unsettling and creepy portrayal of Bates. The actor would go on to star in 3 more installments of the movie franchise, and Gus Van Sant would direct Vince Vaughn in the 1998 remake of the original film. But none of these efforts would prove to be as memorable as the original. And just a fun fact about Psycho, it was the first movie to ever show a toilet flushing. Jason. Jason Voorhees first appeared as the son of camp cook turned murderer Mrs. Voorhees on Friday the 13th. Jason's mom wouldn't even make it to the end of the movie, but her son would go on to terrorize victims in a ridiculous variety of settings, including hell and the future in 11 more films. The original wasn't very well received when it came out in 1980, but has become a cult classic in the following years. Jason's success lies not only in the character's films, but in his notoriety in pop culture and his successes in merchandising. His hockey mask has become one of the most recognizable images in the horror genre. Leatherface. Like Norman Bates, the character Leatherface is partially based on the real-life killer Ed Gein. The two characters have very opposing styles. Bates is subtle, whereas Leatherface is, well, the opposite. Along with his inbred family, Leatherface terrorizes unsuspecting victims with a chainsaw and eats their remains. Like Ed Gein did, Leatherface wears a mask made of human skin. He appeared in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which came out in 1974. Fans are anxiously awaiting the movie Leatherface, which is a prequel about the origins of the character that is supposed to come out sometime next year. Chucky. Chucky first horrified audiences in the 1988 horror classic Child's Play. In the film, the serial killer known as the Lakeshore Strangler transfers his soul to a good guy doll and terrorizes a 6-year-old boy and his family. Chucky would go on to star in 6 more films, including Chucky 7, which released last year. The doll has become an iconic figure and is often referenced in pop culture. Children would never look at the dolls the same way again. And as you can see in this photo of a little boy being terrified of a horrifying doll sat next to him in the car. Brad Dourif plays the Lake Shore Strangler and is the voice of Chucky. He also plays Grima Wortongue, one of the most distasteful characters in the last 2 installments of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Freddy Krueger. Johnny Depp made one of his first on-screen appearances as Glenn in A Nightmare on Elm Street, but it was Robert Englund's Freddy Krueger that would cement the movie as a horror classic. The film was a vision of Wes Craven, who has earned the title Master of Horror by directing a slew of classic horror films like The Hills Have Eyes and the Scream franchise. Much like how Psycho made audiences afraid to take a shower, A Nightmare on Elm Street made people afraid to fall asleep. Krueger would go on to star in 9 films, including Freddy vs. Jason, in which he shares the spotlight with Jason Voorhees. Regan MacNeil. A shy 12-year-old girl portrayed by Linda Blair would become a classic movie villain, though she never wanted to. In The Exorcist, Regan is possessed by an evil spirit who makes the girl perform some incredibly disgusting acts while the priests attempt to exorcise the demon. Producers considered Jamie Lee Curtis for the role of Regan until her mother, Janet Leigh, refused to let her audition. The Exorcist was released in 1973 and would go on to become one of the most memorable and profitable horror movies of all time. It was the first horror film to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture, though The Sting would win the award that year. Michael Myers. Jamie Lee Curtis may have missed her shot at being in an iconic horror film when her mother, Janet Leigh, didn't let her audition for The Exorcist, but it wouldn't take the up-and-coming actress long to find her way. John Carpenter, a giant in horror cinema, would cast Curtis in Halloween, widely considered one of the best horror flicks of all time. The 1978 slasher classic features masked villain Michael Myers terrorizing Curtis's character Laurie Strode and her friends in a quiet suburban town on Halloween night. The film would go on to be incredibly successful, grossing nearly $70 million in box office sales despite its meager $300,000 budget. Halloween would turn into a franchise that has so far produced 9 sequels. Sauron. Mostly portrayed in the form of a giant eye or a silhouette in the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit trilogies respectively, Sauron is nonetheless one of the most iconic and memorable villains to appear in cinema or literature. He leads an army of evil beings including orcs and trolls in his attempt to rule Middle-earth and desecrate all who oppose him. Ultimately, Sauron fails, but not before creating a character that perfectly exemplifies the word evil.